Okay. Hello and welcome to this webinar on the explicit instruction of writing. Today we're really excited to welcome 5 practitioners who hold various roles across 5 very different settings in our region. They'll be sharing their explicit approaches to teaching writing using the principles outlined from webinar 1. The practitioners presenting today will be discussing one or more of the principles and showcasing how they teach writing across the phases, how writing is taught across different subjects, how pupils are supported to build up cultural capital and enough subject content, the resources and reading that's influenced their approaches, the impact of how explicit writing has improved the pupils' writing, and reflections on the comparative judgment webinar. We'll also see some examples of pupils' work and the soft or hard impact data for how the strategies have improved writing. So our first contributor is Laura Taylor, Head Teacher of St Joseph's Primary School in the Vale of Glamorgan. Laura will be presenting on a systematic approach to teaching writing explicitly and using lessons learned from comparative judgment. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. As I said, I'm Laura Taylor, the head teacher of St Joseph's Primary School in the Vale of Glamorgan. So just to give a little bit of context about our school before I share my screen, we have 205 pupils on roll, 15% free school meal children, 9% with additional learning needs, and 20% from ethnic backgrounds other than white. We've been a pioneer school for the humanities and an innovation school. So I'm going to share my screen now and share with you some of our practice in writing and how we've developed writing and our curriculum journey so far. So we began redesigning our curriculum journey approximately 4 years ago with all stakeholders, and we evaluated how effectively the school curriculum at the time developed the 4 purposes, provided enriching experiences and built on prior knowledge and skills. Following that evaluation, we decided that our key priority was to develop a curriculum which built systematically a framework of knowledge acquisition and developed an extensive vocabulary and wide-ranging literacy and numeracy skills. All stakeholders were provided with the opportunity to identify the knowledge, skills and attitudes that they wanted pupils of St Joseph's to develop. The overarching question was, by the time they leave St Joseph's School, what should pupils know, be able to do, and what attributes should they have? And we shortened this to Know, Do, Be. We established a curriculum development team, and knowing that we wanted to develop a vision and rationale for change based on research and evidence-informed practice, we read widely. And you can see on the screen some of the key reading that's informed our practice over the last 4 years. From reception to year 4, we teach reading and writing through carefully planned accumulative skills units. These units design pupils' reading experiences to maximise their practice in newly taught spelling sound patterns and ensures pupils learn to read words automatically and effortlessly. Explicit instruction in the spelling patterns of the English language transitions pupils from spending an excess of mental energy on decoding and learning to read to fluency so that they can focus on comprehension and analysis, reading to learn. The skills units teach the most frequent spelling patterns, first in order to maximise the words children can read and move them into engaging, well-written, decodable texts during the spring term of the reception class. Pupils who master the skills units will have all the decoding skills necessary to succeed, and the models of teaching support all the pupils to achieve mastery at each stage. The lessons teach print and phonological awareness, spelling patterns, decoding and encoding, writing mechanics and writing structures and processes. The decodable readers, which we call texts, are uniquely designed to provide pupils with intensive practice with the code while reading simple but compelling and authentic stories for the first time. This introduces them to the elements of plot, character and story. And the skills units also offer consistent, explicit language instruction. Pupils learn and apply the conventions of English grammar, punctuation and spelling, practicing orally and in writing. And on the screen, you can see some examples from the Year 2 unit Fables. The systematic teaching of reading, spelling, grammar and punctuation continues into Year 4, and here you can see some examples of this on this screen and on the next. However, in Year 4, we begin to teach similar knowledge content in our language, literacy and communication lessons with our domain lessons. So in this example, the Year 4 pupils learn literacy skills in their skills unit, Rattenborough's Guide to the Animals, as well as learning about the classification of animals in their domain or topic lessons. And through their domain lessons, they also build up to writing an extended piece using the skills that they've learned in their LLC lessons, and in this case, for example, writing information paragraphs about vertebrates and eventually a non-chronological report. In Years 5 and 6, nearly all pupils will have mastered most elements of reading and writing included in the skills units and are ready to learn through studying published novels and carefully selected non-fiction texts and poems. Pupils continue to learn about the conventions of English, such as grammar and punctuation, through a direct instruction scheme called expressive writing. This scheme, which was recommended by Daisy Christodoulou, focuses on the writing and editing of basic sentences, paragraphs and stories. Instructional strands include mechanics, sentence writing, paragraph and story writing and editing. So pupils in Year 5 and 6 are ability grouped around across the two classes into 2 expressive writing lessons each week, with Group 1 following expressive writing 1 and Group 2 following the more demanding expressive writing 2. In every lesson, children learn to write with structure by writing sentences that first name something and then tell more, then by arranging sentences appropriately, with coherence by relating sentences logically, with unity by developing well-supported paragraphs, and with correct grammar and punctuation by writing first, then editing using a self-administered cumulative check system. So you can see some examples of how expressive writing helps build on their prior knowledge of sentence construction to write longer pieces of writing in their domain work. Our school's knowledge-rich curriculum is coherent, progressive and rigorous. Through immersive domain units, pupils are introduced to topics and themes that enable them to gain knowledge and develop skills in each of the 6 areas of learning and experience. Carefully planned learning activities provide stimulating and enriching experiences for pupils that commit key information to long-term memory and develop curiosity, imagination and creativity. This is an example of the Year 6 domain overview. The school's curriculum map was developed by a curriculum development team which comprised of 5 teachers within the school. The curriculum offer includes input from pupils, parents, staff members and governors about what pupils should know, be able to do and which attributes they should develop are know-do-be. With additional inputs from external partners with expertise in curriculum design, the team developed a curriculum map from reception to Year 6. And this map provides an overview for the teaching of 5 of the 6 areas of learning and experience. For maths, we use the Singapore Maths No Problem scheme. At St Joseph's, we make connections across the areas of learning and experience through our innovative and enriching domain units. Through an effective 4-stage teaching and learning model, pupils are immersed in a topic, acquire powerful domain-specific vocabulary and knowledge, build up to an extended piece of writing, and then apply, extend and celebrate their learning. Domains are mostly science and technology or humanities focused, and through interdisciplinary teaching, the expressive arts and health and well-being are integrated into the unit. There's a strong focus on the cross-curriculum skills through the 4 stages, with rich opportunities to develop pupils' literacy and numeracy skills and digital competence. On the right of the screen is an example of what our stage 3 looks like. So stage 3 of our domain writing is the build up to writing. This stage is structured into 5 steps to create an extended piece of writing using the powerful knowledge they've learned during the domain and applying the skills they've learned in their LLC and expressive writing sessions. So you can see the sorts of ideas that go into each step there in that table. So step 1, looking at the hook and the features. Step 2, planning and practicing. Step 3, drafting. Step 4, editing. And finally, step 5, publish. So you can see here on the next slide an example of a pupil's work for Build Up to Writing. This Year 4 pupil has planned an information paragraph about birds. They've drafted their information paragraph, and then using our feedback and marking policy, which includes a strategy called self-improvement and application time. You can see this with the purple pen. The child has improved their own work using the success criteria and the CAT, self-improvement and application time checklist. Looking at data then for our writing curriculum, this is some data linked to the Year 5 and 6 expressive writing units. So after every 15 lessons in expressive writing, there's a review. The pupils complete an assessment which helps to identify what of the skills covered have been successfully learned by the pupil and whether there are any misconceptions before moving forward. A teacher is able to analyse the assessment results rigorously. And on the next page, you can identify specific pupils who needed further targeted practice at different elements of writing. So for this year group, you can see progress has been made in each area studied until lesson 30. So 76% met the benchmark for writing in the past tense at lesson 30, compared to 68% after lesson 15, 88% for capital letters and full stops, compared to 72% 15 lessons earlier, and 76% accuracy in pronouns compared to 56%, 84% using capitalisation accurately at lesson 30. The teachers then are able to identify specific pupils who've made progress between the two reviews, and they use this to inform the way forward before the next review at lesson 45. As part of our monitoring, evaluation and review process, we also conducted a listening to learners around expressive writing lessons, and you can see some of their comments here. In 2019 to 2020, we took part in the Assessing Primary Writing project with No More Marking that uses comparative judgment to assess pieces of writing for different cohorts throughout the school. This was a great way to be able to assess how well our pupils were developing their writing ability and to inform phase and whole school evaluations about how well our curriculum was developing pupils' writing skills. As you can see, in years 1 and 2, our pupils are slightly behind the all schools average, bearing in mind that around 90% of the schools are in England, and this equates to a few schools in a few months in the no more marking writing age. Year 3 was a bit of an anomaly for the school, and this is interesting for a few reasons, including the free school meal and additional learning need profile of that class, as well as attendance data for underachieving pupils in that cohort. I won't go into detail about this, but as with all useful data, the information was great for helping us to ask questions rather than giving us the answers. The scaled score and writing age for Year 4 pupils was significantly higher than all schools average. And this was also interesting for us, as this was the first cohort that had been through the school studying all of the skills units and domain units. So they were our pilot year. Again, we need to be careful not to make assumptions, but to ask really good questions about the data. Year 5 was exactly in line with the all schools averages, and Year 6 were a few scaled score behind. As well as all of this information, as helpful as this was, all of this information was from 2019 to 2020, and we were making comparisons between our children's writing in Wales and the standards of writing for pupils largely in England, where there's a very different curriculum and a different focus on the development of writing skills. So we were delighted when the CSC started the comparative judgment pilot, and we were very keen to get involved. So 2 year groups have taken part in that comparative judgment project with the CSC so far. Again, we were able to ask questions about our results, and in particular, we looked really closely at the results for our Year 3 pupils. So you can see that the average writing for pupils in Year 3 is slightly below all schools. And when we dove deeper into that, we found that the girls' average writing age was actually higher than all schools, but the boys' writing age was significantly lower. As part of the judging process, all the teachers completed an analysis sheet which identified the strengths of the writing, the main weaknesses and errors noted, how pupils struggled in other ways such as handwriting, and suggestions for writing improvements which could impact on our provision. And so following the analysis, we've planned an intervention for our Year 3 boys using the Writing Revolution materials, and that's going to start after the Easter break. So I hope that's given you some insight into our process for writing and part of our curriculum journey at St Joseph's. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Laura. That was fantastic, really insightful. Our next contributor is Andy Lilford, who is Head of English at St Cyre's School in the Vale of Glamorgan. And he'll be presenting on the symbiotic relationship between reading and writing. So I'm just going to share my screen so that Andy can take it away.
Thanks, Emma. That's great. I mean, I hope there's quite a bit of crossover between some of the things that Laura's just said, but I think it will be clear that we're probably a lot closer to the beginning of our journey than perhaps St Joe's are. So I haven't got anywhere near as much to share in terms of kind of historical data or kind of hard outcomes, but I think, you know, some of the connections are really obvious. Certainly, we felt like we learned an awful lot from the comparative judgment exercise with our current Year 7 cohort. And in terms of outcomes, we saw really kind of very polarized outcomes, which tended to reinforce some ideas that we already had. And what I'm showing there really is sort of the headline breakdown from the end of Daisy Christodoulou's feedback in terms of insights and what makes good writing. So before I try and talk about what we're doing in terms of writing, I think probably like lots of secondary schools and lots of secondary school English departments, really what we did first of all, when we were thinking about redesigning our curriculum in the light of kind of Curriculum for Wales and in the light of some really good CPD in terms of the Research Ed Cymru and other events that have been put on. The first thing that we looked at really was texts. We looked at what we were asking our students to read. And one of the things that informed that was a brilliant piece of training a year ago, last December now, and it was the Reading Reconsidered training provided by Doug Lemov and co in London. And as the name suggests, it was all about reconsidering what we read, how we read, and why we read. So that informed our decisions about texts in Key Stage 3 and into Key Stage 4. So we started to build our curriculum around texts which addressed the core plagues of reading. So issues such as children coming into touch with archaic language or problematic narration. And that informed some of the key decisions we made about our curriculum. So reading came first, if I'm honest. But it didn't take us long really to realise that, you know, we were going to have to carefully consider some of our writing approaches as well. And the timing for the comparative judgment pilot was brilliant for us, because we were already embedding sort of explicit teaching of vocab alongside the texts. We were involved with the Reading Reconsidered scheme of work pilot. So we teach Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime from the Reading Reconsidered pilot. We do that with Year 9. We are trialling Animal Farm with Year 8, and we did Boy with Year 7. And you know, when you buy into that, and when you buy into a lot of the training that we had in December, vocab is very much kind of front and center. I mean, vocab has been called a proxy for knowledge, a proxy for learning, and you know, that absolutely tied in with Daisy's feedback from the comparative judgments. You can see that vocab is right up the top there. Alongside that, it wasn't a big surprise that sentence structure was a big kind of differentiator between relative success and failure with the comparative judgments. And we knew that. We'd been having quite a lot of conversations with our feeder primaries about sentence construction. And you know, as Laura also said, I think we've sort of also been looking at what schools in England are doing in terms of explicit teaching of writing. And I'm quite interested in places like the Torquay Academy or Greenshaw Academy Trust that seem to do a really good job, particularly with perhaps their disadvantaged learners. And, you know, for us, that's obviously a real priority, as it is for most schools. You know, how do we close that gap? You know, how do we get students with a relatively poor reading diet reading and writing more effectively? So sentence structure was very much on our radar. And clarity, I suppose, down the bottom was the last to kind of join the party for us, and that's something that I'm just now starting to talk about with the department. So on the next slide, here's the first one that I mentioned. So the way that we teach vocab and the way that I think it sticks best is when it's tied to a narrative. So, you know, we know from cognitive studies that the human brain gives primacy to narratives. We like creating stories, and stories stick with us very well. And I do feel that there's this symbiotic relationship between reading and writing in terms of, you know, vocab that crops up in challenging texts, in this case, Animal Farm. When you teach that vocab alongside particular characters or alongside particular events from those narratives, the soft evidence that we have in conversations with students is very much that vocab and those terms stick with them much better than perhaps if you're taking a more kind of bitty extract-based approach. You can remind them, you know, which characters are associated with the adjective obstinate, you know, which characters appropriate certain things. And, you know, when you're going on that kind of narrative journey, I suppose, through a book, it gives you that opportunity to recap on vocab, to quiz, to test the level of recall that students have with that vocab. So I think it's a really obvious place where there is that sort of symbiotic relationship between the two. And what we are seeing at Key Stage 4 is some quite surprising and some quite pleasing results where vocab that we perhaps taught to demystify challenging texts are then cropping up in students' writing and in students in tasks that they have to do, such as summarising in the current Language 2 Unit 2 paper. That we're going through with them. We're seeing words like burgeoning, words like obstinate, you know, cropping up, which were actually taught in line with previous narratives. So the kind of to and fro between reading and writing there seems kind of quite clear. One thing I'd say about the vocab, and this was something that the Lemov team stressed as well, was trying to create a personal link for students, I think is really powerful. So, you know, asking students, when might being obstinate work for you, and trying to link it to a real kind of classroom situation or a social situation, I think gives them real ownership over terms that they want to be able to use. On the next slide, this is more then moving on to sentence structure, and I think probably the biggest barrier and the biggest bugbear for secondary school teachers, I think, is, you know, these comments that they're not writing inaccurate sentences. And looking back to what Laura was saying about, you know, the expressive writing package, that's something that we are using and we're experimenting with, perhaps not in quite the systematic way that it's been happening for several years at St Joe's, but certainly what we are seeing is a real engagement with what makes a good sentence. So expressive writing is something we've engaged with and are trialing, and I think it's fair to say we're finding our way with it. Supplementing that, and something that really has had massive levels of buy-in across the school, is the writing revolution. I think what I really like about the writing revolution approach is that it's a structured, stepped approach to writing. and it starts from analysing and critiquing sentence fragments and thinking why fragments are not full sentences, right the way up to developing structures for sustained writing and multi-paragraph writing. So things that we've started with, a good example I just wanted to show because it's fairly clear and fairly easy to get your head around, is the sentence structure of the appositive. And here, I think this is taken from our Year 7 current work with the monster calls. And you can see that matching the noun with the appositive that best describes it is a really clear and simple way into a sentence construction that you can see at the bottom, which is not a common spoken sentence construction. So with our responses to the comparative judgment task, we were very clearly seeing some students using sentence constructions which were from speech and making the same mistakes which were from speech, you know, varying from things like might of through to, you know, huge run-on sentences which mirrored the way that they might speak. So, you know, the appositive sentence, I think, is a great way of introducing students to code switching and different ways of communicating. The appositive sentence isn't something that you would come across or use naturally in your everyday speech, but it is something that you would see in formal, sophisticated writing. And it is a really, really good tool for students to have in their toolkit when they're writing topic sentences, for example, or when they're writing an introduction. So, you know, last lesson with Year 10, we're talking about an inspector calls. So in place of these examples for monster calls, we were giving them key themes from an inspector calls. So, you know, wealth, for example, or secrecy. What's another way of describing wealth? What's another way of describing secrecy? And helping them build up to write appositive sentences for the opening of an essay or the opening of a section of an essay. On the next slide is an illustration for students' benefit. So this was something I showed my Year 11 class a couple of days ago, because we've been doing the appositive sentence construction, and lots of them were asking why. You know, perfectly good question. Why do we need to know this stuff? So a quick kind of search of some articles that we've used to prep them for their English language paper. You quickly notice like what a useful tool it is and how commonly it's used in non-fiction writing, you know, and report writing. So I pointed out to them, you know, that there are 2 paragraphs here from a Guardian article about biodiversity and the environment, which we'd previously used. And, you know, it just so happens that the first sentence in both of these paragraphs is an appositive construction. And I think, you know, it was very, very useful for them to see that a writing construction is there, it's present in a high quality piece that they've been reading. So again, you know, I think there's real value to be had in linking between what we ask them to read and then what we ask them to write. And I think that's perhaps really clear on my next slide, if I've remembered what's on my next slide. Yeah, so here is something that that I've been using for a while, and again, I'm really pleased that subjects like PE, science, have bought into in St Cyries as well. The idea of using sentence combining tasks to encourage students to manipulate, to master sentence variation in particular. So what happens here is you might recognise a section from the introduction of Curly's Wife and of Mice and Men. And if you kind of break down Steinbeck's writing into simple sentences, what you've got is clear repetition. What you've got are lower order sentences, which, you know, Daisy's feedback describes very, very clearly. We've got repetition, we've got repetitive sentence constructions. When we ask students to perhaps combine sentences, to consider careful use of conjunctions, to consider syntax and think about whether word order can be switched around, what you get is a real engagement with manipulating and mastery of sentence construction. And then what's lovely is, well, I think is lovely anyway, what I think is great is that you can then show them what Steinbeck wrote. And in many cases, they will make the comment that what they've done is far more sophisticated, and they might get a level 7, or they might get a B grade, whereas Steinbeck's it all seems a little bit simple. And we've had relatively reluctant writers start with things like sausages, the girl's hair cascaded down her back, or rouged and wide-spaced, comma. So naturally kind of varying sentence openers, but by using what's there. So again, what I'm trying to keep coming back to is the way that it's a two-way street, I feel, between what we're asking students to read and then actually kind of taking control of that and really exploring it. Because we did have comments from students about the way that he'd put it together, the way that Steinbeck was writing. A sort of an emphasis on the simple, the straightforward, and why that might be. So as they were taking ownership of the sentences and the content, they were actually making more informed comments about Steinbeck's stylistic choices, which was really really rewarding. I think this is my last slide. Next we've got kind of very much work in progress for us, as a lot of this is. But Daisy's comment in the what makes good writing and patterns in good writing, actually the two examples that she used in that slide of good writing were actually examples of nominalization. There's some brilliant writing on this, and I know, like David Didow's blog, if you Google nominalization and Didow, he's got some links to other people's writing and other people's thinking on this. But very often, a more sophisticated writing is marked by the use of nominalization. So rather than tell a story about what happens, actually you turn a verb into a noun, you nominalize it. So if we take this geography text, it's full of nominalization. So it's full of, you've got a word like urbanization. Rather than saying 53% of people who live in the world or living in the world, you've got 53% of the population. So you've got a verb construction like who are living turned into a noun construction, population. And straight away you can see the sort of level of sophistication rises. You're moving from a sort of more of a narrative to more of an explanatory or more of an analytical style. So that's some work that we're doing at the moment, and we have literacy steering group meetings, and this was something that came up yesterday in our literacy steering group meeting, and was something that particularly science teachers, geography teachers actually were very, very keen on doing, giving students a simpler version and asking them to nominalize, asking them to transform the writing into a more sophisticated version. So that's where we are. I hope I haven't gone on too long.
Oh, that's great, Andy, and I absolutely love the fact that you're trying to teach pupils to write it in a better stylistic way than Steinbeck. So thank you very much. Our next contributor is Barbara Murphy, who is Deputy Head Teacher at St Robert's Catholic Primary School, Bridgend, and she will be presenting on promoting a consistent and explicit approach to writing instruction across a setting. So thanks a lot, Barbara.
Thank you, Emma. Well, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. As I say to the children in my class, legs crossed, toes crossed, fingers crossed. This all works for us. So hopefully you can see my screen. I'm not brave enough to go into PowerPoint mode like Laura did, so I'll be staying like this for now. Just to give you a little idea of the context of our school in particular. So we are situated in the village of Aberpenvig in Bridgend, and we have about 190 children on roll, aged about 3 to 11. And our children are organised in 6 classes of all mixed year groups. And you can see there we've got about 12% free school meals, about 7% SEN, so we're a little bit below the national averages. What I'd like to start off with, maybe a little bit of a warning or a caveat really, that I'm not showing anything particularly new or exciting today. There are no quick fixes or magic cures when it comes to developing writing within your school. Everything really I'm sharing with you are simple strategies and just really good teaching and learning, having that secure pedagogy. I would also say as well that our writing journey is a long journey, and there's still plenty for us to be getting on with and plenty of further steps for us to take. For us as a school, the key thing has always been consistency. So consistency across phases, across classes, consistency in approach, in the language that we use with the children. And I would just like to say as well that, you know, the staff in the school very much see themselves as teachers of writing, one of the principals mentioned previously, and they know their role is very important in the development of this skill, and actually have been empowered over the years to do their own research and development and share this with staff. And I will say I'm very lucky. They very much lead and develop the practice within the schools themselves now. There's quite a high level of autonomy within our school in that sense. So when I asked staff, well, what do we do with writing, what's really, really good? The first thing they mentioned was letter formation. So I've put some notes on the screen for you there. And what I've tried to do in the little blue box is just try and make those links to those 7 principles that you've been looking at previously. So obviously the big thing is letter formation, as you can see here, and making sure that children practice their fine and gross motor skills and that this becomes part of their working memory. There's lots of modelling involved in the nursery classroom, not just by the teacher, but also by the support staff, and they both model in the same way. So there's that consistency amongst the staff in the school as well. The other thing that the Foundation Phase staff in particular were keen to stress was that the child's journey in writing is very much down to them. We don't move children on very, very quickly because we're very keen to get them doing lots and lots of writing straight away. So our nursery practitioner, Mrs. Neal, was very quick to say, we don't move them on to copying or underwriting unless they are confident with their overwriting. And that comes across right the way throughout in Foundation Phase, that it is very much set at their own pace. I have included some examples of writing, so you can kind of see their writing throughout the school and see the journey that they make in particular. And then obviously once the children are writing, and we always start with their name because that really engages them, I think, in their writing journey in particular. We build up to look at writing single words, labels, lists, completing sentences, and all the time modelling and share writing is used. And for us, that is a massive strategy for improving children's writing, for them to see it modelled for them. Once they can do their writing in terms of words, we move on to phrases, and then we move on to sentences as well. So it's very, very much built up to the children. We're mastering those little bits as we go along, that key principle too. The other thing we use is lots of shared pen approach. So children are encouraged, when they can, use their phonic knowledge to sound words out. They might be able to record the initial sound of the word, but if they struggle with the rest of the word, the member of staff will model for them how to sound it out and how to record it for them as well. Okay, so there's lots of independent writing based on their sound knowledge, but also as well with support needed when maybe they're struggling with the end of a word or with some letter formation as well. The other big factor for us in our school is the phonics and high frequency words. So with our phonics, we use letters and sounds, and in the year leading up to COVID, I suppose, 2019 to 2020, we assessed all the Foundation Phase children on letters and sounds, and we worked out what phase within that they were currently at, and then we actually streamed the children. So the children were put mixed year group, mixed classes into groups for their phases, and at a set time every day they would go with their Foundation Phase staff. Teachers and support staff alike, we value our support staff in terms of training them, and they would have 15 minutes input daily at their particular phase that they were at. Obviously, in our post-COVID world, that's having to be done more in class, but children are still being grouped by their phase, and that's the way that they're taught their phonics, and that's done daily with them, and we feel has had a massive impact on their writing in particular. The other thing we do is we do high frequency words. So the children are given 5 to 6 words a week from the 100 high frequency word list, and they have to read and spell those words. Thank you, just leave it there, Mr. Ralph, thank you. They have to read and spell those words. Once they can, they're able to move on then to the next set of words. And what we're seeing is that speeding up the children's writing process, and it's allowing greater opportunity for teachers and support staff to talk about sentence level work or to develop the children's vocabulary and language that they're using. Because they're not focusing on those basics, they're actually able to focus more on their composition and on the quality of the writing in particular. So that's been hugely beneficial. Throughout the school, and similar really to Laura's school, we have a set writing process by which the children go through when we come to do writing. So as Laura does in her school, we have that hook, that introduction to the text in particular, and they will talk about the purpose, the audience, the language, the structure. We'll often build into here lots of oracy activities as well, because those oracy skills are so important for the children to develop their own writing. Okay, and then we maybe will do some word and sentence level work linked to the text. We might do some short bursts of writing as well, where we can give the children some feedback, help them to improve their writing so that when they come to their final piece, they're actually able to put our feedback into practice in particular. I would say this is an area, the word and sentence level, we are looking to develop, especially across the curriculum, using some of the writing revolution activities and skills that have been mentioned, I think, earlier today. We then come to probably one of the most important parts of the writing process for us, and that is the planning process. We use the same planning frameworks throughout the school, so again, we've got that consistency. So we use the Sue Palmer non-fiction skeletons, and we use the story mountain. Because they've been used so long in the school, the children are really familiar with them now. So they're already hitting the ground running when it comes to seeing these. We'll also have lots of chats about the success criteria. You know, what do we need to put in it? What will it look like when it's good? Maybe what will it look like when it's excellent? And we'll share with the children maybe good examples of work to discuss the good features, but maybe as well, bad examples of work. What could you do to improve? If you were the teacher, what would you be saying now? And then when it comes to the writing process, again, there's that modelling for the children. So staff will always do some shared writing with the children. They will always model writing for the children as an example. We use lots of scaffolds, so sentence starters and word maps. And obviously, as they get older, and maybe they become more confident in certain genres of writing, we try to remove those scaffolds away so they're becoming gradually more and more independent by the time they come to year 5 and year 6. We make sure there's always time for the reviewing and editing of the work. That's really, really important for the children. So lots of mini pit stops are used in lessons. Staff can maybe address misconceptions, but pupils can read over their work. They can start to edit. They can start to kind of rewrite it as they're going along. And then AFL is very well embedded in the school. So we always encourage the children to self-assess their written work. What did you do well? What do you think you need to work on? But also as they get older to peer assess their work. So hopefully maybe they can see some good examples in someone else's work to help improve their own. So I've just included some pictures of writing for you. Just so you can kind of see the story planning and then the story writing itself. This particular piece, it's not photographed very well because he did his plan in pencil. This actually links to our inquiry-based topics. So we talk about the children having a real purpose for writing, and I know the Eston document in March was very keen on that. We do an inquiry-based approach where the children have a client that they work for, they have a role as an expert group, and they have like a final commission. So this is one of our year 6 children working for Lord Shaftesbury on the Mines Commission of 1842, writing a report on the conditions of children in the South Wales Valley. So he's planned out his non-chronological report, having already done non-chronological report writing in English, and then he's actually written out, this is just part of his report that he's written then to Lord Shaftesbury in particular. So we try to give it a very real purpose to the writing. This example is an example of where we've done lots of little short bursts of writing to build up. So we've looked at Alfred Noy's poem, The Highwayman, lots of activity skills at the same time, a little character riddle for the highwayman, a little bit of descriptive writing sentence work, ready then to lead into their final piece of writing where they would write from different characters' points of view, hopefully bringing in their previous work to help improve their writing there. I would say that writing is everywhere within the school. So the displays in foundation phase with phonic sounds on them. In Key Stage 2, pupils' written work is on display. You know, it's there as models of writing, but also it's there to celebrate them as writers, for them to appreciate that they are a writer as well. In foundation phase, the writing areas always have extra opportunities for writing, and they often link to the skills previously taught, so there's that consolidation for the children. The foundation phase staff have been working really hard on some writing targets, which they've started to put together now, and which they've started to use with the children and share with parents, so that everybody knows the journey that the child is on in particular. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, consistency is key. Standardisation processes help with that. So everyone looking at pieces of writing together, talking about what is the way forward, what's good about this piece of writing, means that everybody is very, very aware of what, you know, they need to maybe build on, or where their children will be going next in their writing journey. We were just keen to mention P4C, we are Philosophy for Children's School. It's an excellent way of developing vocabulary and children's ability to speak in sentences. And the oracy aspect of that we do feel has benefited the children's writing. It has helped them to kind of structure their sentences a little bit better. And obviously as well, as a faith school, RE is a large part of our curriculum. It's a very literacy-based subject, so there's lots of writing opportunities within there. That means we can practice skills and consolidate skills learned elsewhere as well. So again, I've just included, I mean, you can see there's some examples of non-chronological report writing in RE, writing a diary extract in RE as well, and also how we just celebrate the children's work in the school so they can be proud of it. And it's not just the best pieces of work, it is, you know, the pieces of work that show progress and that, you know, just really make the children feel proud and feel that they are writers themselves. We did take part, or we are taking part, I should say, in the comparative judgment pilot. And as Laura did in her school, we've done the writing activities for Year 3 and Year 5, and we'll be doing the other year groups now in the summer term. Teacher feedback has been really interesting on this. We feel it's a very quick way of assessing children. It's great for giving whole class feedback, which we have used it for. And it's great for maybe identifying needs of a cohort and thinking of ways in which the curriculum can be personalised to meet those needs. It's also raised for us as well the idea that we need to maybe work on sentence level a bit more. We can see those ideas that I think Andy mentioned earlier, you know, sentence coherence is not quite as accurate as we would like. There's some really useful data generated with it. For us, the interesting thing will be when we can start to measure progress. So either when we do the second year of this cycle or whether we can repeat activities again. And I think for all staff in the school, and again, we included our support staff in these activities, it is a great form of professional learning and development. Having those discussions, what makes something a good piece of writing? We can all be then singing from the same song sheet, as it were. So again, I've included, these are just some of the examples of the writing that was submitted. On the left is a Year 3 piece, and on the right is a Year 5 piece in particular. The only other thing I've kind of really added is just to say our journey continues. We aren't a finished product, we know that. So we are looking at the writing revolution. We are looking at the explicit teaching of vocabulary because the research is there to say that's a good way of developing practice. We are looking at using Alan Peate's sentences to kind of further develop that sentence structure, as well as looking at obviously the new curriculum and how we can incorporate comparative judgment into our work as well. So, I mean, I've included my details there and I'm happy to share my PowerPoint with anyone. And hopefully there's something there, one little golden nugget that maybe you can just take away and you know, use. So thank you, Emma.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Barbara, for sharing your journey and how you promote that consistent approach. Thank you very much. So our next contributor is Sylvia Dashkovich, who is Head of English at Fitzallen High School in Cardiff, and she is going to be presenting on how to use Key Stage 5 content to teach writing at Key Stage 4.
Thank you. Let me just share my PowerPoint very quickly. So can you see my PowerPoint now? Am I sharing it?
Yep, that's there, Sylvia.
Oh, thank you. So I think I will start from the beginning. So we have a very big cohort at Key Stage 5 doing English literature. Normally we have about 50-60 pupils who decide to do A-levels in English Lit, and one of the biggest struggle it is for us is to make sure that all of the Key Stage 5 pupils are well equipped with their writing skills when they join the A-level course. Now, it's no surprise that a lot of our pupils at Key Stage 4 struggle with writing as well. So making sure that the transition process is as smooth as possible is really, really important for all of us. During the pandemic, the gap has become really, really big when it comes to writing skills between the free school meals, non-free school meals, mainly disadvantaged pupils. So we got a little bit worried that when we come back and we go back to normal, we will really struggle with some of our pupils when it comes to the writing skills, but more importantly, we will struggle even more at Key Stage 5, and we may not have as many pupils deciding to do A-levels in English literature. So we thought of something completely different. So we thought, how can we make sure that we interest of our pupils in what we can offer at Key Stage 5, not just for English Lit, but also for media and film studies, how we can use that content, but also at the same time, how can we make sure that we are teaching them the writing skills that they need to pass their exams and to make sure that they're not disadvantaged when they join Key Stage 5. So we would normally, when we teach writing, we start with brainstorming and ordering material. So it is no surprise as well that before all of our pupils are asked to complete any sort of a writing task, we do ask them to brainstorm, think of different ideas. Normally, all good writers will spend a day, a month, sometimes a year or few years to actually think of something lovely. For example, they're writing a book. But with the year 11s, we don't have that much time. We don't have time for them to sleep on it and think of different ideas that they may want to include in their writing. So we do tell them about thinking of their titles carefully, of planning the answers, jotting down any sort of ideas, but this is not enough because this is just the beginning of the journey. So we ask ourselves the question, what needs to be done really to improve writing in a secondary setting? And we all know that improving the writing skills doesn't start and finish in the room when we are delivering English, that this is the job for all of us. And we have analyzed so many different things where some of the methods we have been using are old-fashioned. We have had a look at the relationships between teachers and pupils. We had a look also at the options they have chosen because their knowledge, general knowledge, is often quite poor. So we sometimes wonder whether that's because they don't have that capital that can build after school, but also whether we could do anything with their options that could have an impact on improving that content. So what we did at the beginning of this year, before we went to another lockdown, before I go into that, we also had to think about what it is that might be another obstacle with us teaching them the writing skills. And many of us were talking about big groups, particularly in top sets where we may have 35 pupils in class. All those obstacles were largely based actually on our own memories of school. We're thinking of the teachers who were hopeless when we were at school, who were just not very good. And maybe that was one of the reasons why some of us, maybe not so much in the English department, but in other departments, didn't become amazing writers. We talk about textbooks that we still have in the English department that are really ancient. Maybe we are giving them too much homework. Maybe the timetable actually is quite silly with how the lessons are structured and whether the relationships are not good enough. So we took everything into consideration, and then I came up with this plan for everyone in the English department to plan a lesson that will be using the Key Stage 5 content, whether that's media, film studies, or English lit, but focusing on developing writing skills. Now, we are a very big department. There are 20 English teachers, and we have 17 teachers delivering content to year 11s. Now, everyone was asked to create one lesson, but when we're focusing on developing writing skills, we attended the WGC session at the beginning of the year where the session focused actually on bits that year 11s are just not doing very well. And that came from the examiner's report. So what I did was not only I included the bits that I wanted staff to focus on, but that feedback was also taken into consideration. So everyone had to create one lesson, trying to make the lessons as exciting as possible to make sure as well that not only we're teaching them writing, but we're also encouraging them to take the Key Stage 5 courses we offer in the English department to make sure that we have as much buy-in as possible. So I'm just going quickly to go through the writing lesson on description of people, places, and objects that is using actually one of the Key Stage 5 texts that we do with year 13s. So the focus was just to improve vocabulary and the writing skills, so nothing too sophisticated really. So I decided to use the circle that we studied with year 13s for the coursework element. So the lesson just starts with something really, really simple. An extract, a sentence from the first chapter, and just what does the sentence describe? And we just talked about some of the words, and it was interesting to see that a lot of year 11s actually didn't know what a campus means. We have a lot of pupils, over 70% of them are EL, and many of them go home and they don't speak any English. So it didn't really come as a surprise that so many of them didn't really know what a campus is. But that sentence helped them a little bit to be able, so we were able to work out from the context of the sentence what it might actually mean. The pictures were there to support it. And the same, for example, with the question 3, what does Pacific color means? So it was really interesting to see their way of thinking. So we just started with something really, really simple. Now, then we carried on with just showing them the front cover and just really trying to infer what the cover might actually reveal about the plot, what it is that we can find out. And they were very, very perceptive, our year 11s, when we're doing this lesson. And that comes from top sets to bottom sets. And then a very quick synopsis. So this is the overview, where you write. Did you get it right? So we talked a little bit about this. Afterwards, pupils were presented with an extract from chapter 1. And the question was, have you learned actually anything else? Because we did our predictions. We said we used your inference. So what is in there that you have actually learned? And straight away, year 11s were very engaged. They really liked their style of writing. They really liked the content. More or less, at this point, they didn't know what the book was about. So they were really intrigued at this point. Now, what happened next was we asked them to add words and phrases from that extract we've just looked at, which fit the following categories. So what sort of places were mentioned? Now, were there any interesting phrases? Again, focusing on the extract, just analyzing the language in this particular extract and what words are used for the description. So we are focused on the adjectives, on phrases, and the places, and the extract is really rich with the vocabulary. Now, this is where the fun begins when we're teaching them not only how to use a vocabulary effectively, but how to make sure that they can actually move themselves to the next level. So in the second column in here, those are the words of places from the extract. Now, the adjectives in here were the adjectives added by me, and just to show the pupils actually how to make their writing more engaging. And at this point, they were asked to add a few other places, again from the extract, but add their own adjectives to see what it is that they can actually come up with. just to say, this was the second lesson in the scheme of work. So they already had some vocabulary from the first lesson that they were able to use. And then we carried on with the verbs in here, but verbs that are sophisticated again, something different, something that they don't use on a regular basis. And then using adverbial phrases of time. I love grammar. So we were trying to introduce as well. For a while, we've been teaching grammar explicitly in the English department. So we have adverbial phrases of time, and majority of them know exactly what it means. And then making sure that they use adverbial phrases of reason at the end. So they could see actually how beautifully constructed the sentences were. And we just finished the lesson with something that we are all familiar with, just a simple slow writing task where they were told what needs to go in every single sentence. They were told what sort of phrases that they need to use in every single sentence as well. So afterwards, and that went into the second lesson, we did run out of time because the discussion time proved actually incredible. They were really, really engaged. Pupils did come up with some beautiful sentences, and that filled them with confidence as well. That, you know what, that actually when you read something, it does improve your vocabulary. If you analyze the language in a particular chapter and use your background knowledge, you can come up with something really, really amazing. So this is something we have been doing since September, so that there are 17 lessons. We haven't managed to deliver all of them because of the lockdown, so we are carrying on with this now. So I don't have any examples to show you the progress the pupils made during this particular scheme of work because we haven't finished. We didn't want to deliver the lessons online because we thought the lessons are so good and it's something so new for us where we are using the Key Stage 5 content that we really want to evaluate the impact as well as we can with the face-to-face teaching. I do think it's working, and as soon as we finish, I'm more than happy to share the evidence, the results. And I do think it is going to make a difference, and hopefully it will improve our numbers at Key Stage 5 as well, and the writing skills at the same time. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sylvia. Sorry, there's a little bit of an echo there. Our final contributor is Neil Arthur. He is Year 6 teacher at Park Primary in Rhondda, and he's going to be presenting on from the sentence to the paragraph, how to use specific sentence structures to improve writing. So whenever you're ready, Neil.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to show everybody a little bit more about how the journey works here with us, in particular with our classroom. I'm the Year 6 teacher. I have been for 5 of the last 6 years, and we work very closely with in the Chalky cluster with the comprehensive school. So we are a tight-knit group of Year 6 teachers, and like I said, we work in conjunction with the comprehensive school. So some of the issues that I'm going to touch on have been previously identified by sort of the Year 6 and the English coordinators from the comp as ways that we're looking to improve the children in preparation for them to be ready for the comprehensive. Just a little bit about us as a school. We've got just over 200 on roll. We're about 40% FSM at the moment without any AAL at the moment. But being in the community that we are a very, what I would describe as being homogenous society. There is not much diversity here culturally, so we do tend to find our children again have sort of a restricted diet in terms of their language. So the approach I'm going to take you through now is just the way that we are running things at the moment. Well, I'm running things in this classroom at the moment, and some of the strategies that we're going through. So hopefully somebody will be able to pick up some practical tips. Okay, so here's the rationale. What we really want to do is we want to give the children, the analogy I like to use with the children a lot is if you want to paint, you need a full palette to be able to paint a nice picture with. So to give them more shade to their writing, we want to increase in sophistication. And the way that the approach works here is we introduce children to a range of sentence structures based predominantly on the Alan Peat exciting sentences work, and then we break that down into how we can use effective vocabulary choices to fit into our sentence structures, which we'll then develop into leading further on into paragraphing, which I'll have some examples to show. So like I said, we start with the sentence type. So the structure of the sentence effectively gives us a blueprint. So the children know what type of words they'd be looking for, what word classes are we looking for, adverbs, verbs, how many adjectives do we need. And what this does then is, by telling the children which sentence types they're going to be using during the tasks, we reduce the germane load then when it comes to actually writing in more than one sentence at a time. So we tell the children these are the type of sentences we'd be using, and frees up some of that working memory to work on what's my best word choices, how do I order them to make it most effective. The sentence types primarily come from these books. The Writing Revolution is ones that I've read most recently, and we're trying to work on developing. And we have got the Alan Peat work. We were very fortunate to have Alan Peat up as a cluster over 2 years ago. I think he said it was the last ever training event he was going to do, so we were very lucky to have Alan Peat up. So we've learned a lot from that, and as a whole school we use the Alan Peat approach. We're currently working on developing a spine of Alan Peat sentences, which we allocate to each year group, so that by the time the children move up to school, they're again, the diet of, or their palette of sentences they can have at their choice will be increased, so we can increase the sophistication. The pedagogy based on these lessons then is very similar to what we discussed on the last webinar. It's this I do, we do, you do. So teacher's approach is heavily modelling the sentences, talking out loud, then gradually releasing the children and passing the reins over to the children with their writing to allow them to take control and play about with the way that they like to do it in a way that's interesting for the children to use. Okay, so like I said, one thing that we've struggled with as a cluster is we have been made aware a number of times of children moving on from the feeder primaries into the comprehensive have had difficulty with grammar. The sentence structures that we use are predicated on grammar embedded in the sentence structure. So, for example, you'll see some examples shortly of sentences where the children need to use a colon to write the sentence, where they need to use a hyphen, where brackets are included in the sentence type. So again, we're broadening that offer of understanding of grammar within context, so that when the children feel that they are ready to use the grammar, they've got an idea of where it comes from and how it is used, to build up their understanding of language in an organic way, rather than just bespoke grammar lessons. So here's an example. This is a detailed description sentence, and the sentence, as you can see in the example there, the sentence requires the children to use a colon, so they would know, having practiced this sentence a number of times, this is a sentence where I would use a colon and use the purpose of the colon in the sentence. Again, we've got an example with hyphens, so that's just a way of including hyphens to include a phrase into the sentence, much like we talked about the appositives. But again, it's just a different way, so we're broadening the offer that the children have an understanding of their grammar. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about the process of how we go through the actual writing, the mechanics. So usually we'll start with a picture prompt. I've put some websites there if anyone would like to have a look. There's excellent resources there for people to use, but we have found predominantly that using pictures is a massive way to get our children engaged, because all of our writing sessions start with talk. So we want the children to plan ideas, share what ideas with a partner, with a small group. What did you notice about that picture? I noticed this feature. And then start to talk about and generate ideas, which we can then progress into more formal allocation of vocabulary, which will eventually lead us to our sentence structures when they're completed. Okay, so some tools we use things like a word gradient. So if we had, for example, a person who would be angry, and then this is again where teacher's discretion comes in, you would need to have some more sophisticated language at your disposal, and then we'll use angry, furious, cross, annoyed. How do we move these words around? Where would we put them on a scale? So for example, how would the meaning of the sentence change if the subject, the person was furious as opposed to cross. So those are the type of things that we use, which are quite useful for our children who, like I said, have more on the limited side of vocabulary. We got these word gradients, which have been quite effective. Another thing we do is an emotion chart. So the chart will go up on the board, and we do this for lots of words, lots of verbs as well. We've got some ones that, you know, you can, if I did some quietly, silently, that type of thing. Just again, to add some sophistication to our writing. I'm waving because the light's gone off, sorry. So what we're trying to do is give the children then some vocab other than the words that they would normally hinge on and go back to for comfort. So we're trying to increase their independence as a writer by having a broader vocabulary. This is something that I love using, and we'll see in some of the examples we've used as I show you some work coming up. Again, we're talking about reducing the, you know, the work in memory so that the children are building up. Oh, I think I'd like to describe something as being, you know, bubblegum pink or hot pink rather than just pink. And we talk about, well, what would be the difference between something that would be magenta or if it were salmon pink. So again, really allows us to drill down into vocabulary choices, which is, we want our writers to be discerning and they want to have an understanding of the effect that the word choices have on a reader. So here's an example I've chosen of one of the children's work. So again, it's an Alan Peat sentence. None of this work, these sentence types are my own. They're taken from a variety of different places. So what we've got here is a picture prompt, again, from one of the websites I've chosen. So normally what we would do is, if you were to give that to a child, they might say the girl is floating in the spaceship. But by giving them the structure and saying, right, you need to use 4 verbs at the beginning of the sentence, let's describe what's going on. They've really got to concentrate on effective verb choices to illustrate what they want to display on the picture. Now, one thing that we find quite often is, and this is one of the good things I really like about using pictures, is with a class of 20 children, you might find that they'll choose 10 or 15 different things to focus on. So each picture can have a variety of sentences. As long as they're using the correct sentence type in the right context, you can get up a really wide range of input from the children, which again is encouraging that dialogue, discussing about the effective choices that they use. Here's another example. So we've got the sentence structure again from Alan Peat, 3 action starter. So sentences that need to start with a verb, and then you need a colon to make a statement about what's happening there. I'll just leave that up for everybody to have a look at for a second. But again, we've used Jamboard for this. One of the things that the positives from lockdown was using these new tools. And we can have these discussions with the children then, oh, I really liked person X's idea about that, or I really like that sentence. So your AFL, your talk is embedded in all of the things we're trying to do to generate excitement. And the children will talk to each other. I really love the way you used that word. I think I'm going to pinch that one next time. So getting the children excited and wanting to play with the words is something I think is massively important, because this approach could be very prescriptive, but we want the children to be excited and enthused and want them to really think about how they can get people excited about what to read what they're writing. Okay, so when we've got our sentences and we've gone over and we've increased our palette of sentences, what we try to do then is we want to build that up into a paragraph, like we saw in the last presentation. 2 different ways to approach. One that we can do, again, and this comes down to your personal choice of differentiation, or for stretching your more able learners or supporting your children who might need a little bit more support. You can either allocate specifically the order of the sentences you'd like the children to write in, or maybe put 10 or 12 sentences up and tell the children, I'd like you to use 8 of these 12 sentences in your paragraph. So I've got an example here on the next slide. So here's a picture prompt there, and I've allocated the 7 sentences that I'd like the children to write. So with the slow writing, as the teacher, you can be focused and direct the children to make sure they don't miss anything out, which is important. And again, that's stretching the children's thinking. Well, why would Sir want me to write about that? Why might I think that it's important to write about those things? And again, it's generating that dialogue about what's obvious, what's not obvious, what things might be hidden in the picture, what things would we choose to accentuate, what things should we maybe not, because everyone would pick that thing to write about. Again, you can see with the sentence structures there, it doesn't tell you what you need to write about. It just gives you the framework, so the element of choice and excitement comes from the children then, because with a picture like that, you know, that you could end up with a wide variety of examples, as we'll see in the next one here. It's a little bit smaller, unfortunately. So what we want to do is just generate, like I said, generate some excitement, show the children that they can be successful in writing engaging and exciting things that people want to read. And so that again is developing their love, their excitement, their enjoyment of writing, and giving them that feeling of being successful and I can be a writer. And we'll see that in the next example, because I've got some examples of one of my children who is probably one of the children would need a little bit more support. So what I did is I've recently been reading The Right Stuff by Jane Constantine and watching lots of the live lessons that she's done during lockdown. So I'm trying to marry up this sort of approach and pinch some of her ideas, embed them with the Alan Pete type of thing that we're doing, and see where that takes us, really. Because at the point where we are with the sentence structures now, our children are very competent and confident at using a variety of structures, but we need to show them how we can progress that from 8 sentences into a paragraphs. And this Right Stuff approach by Jane Constantine, I found has been very interesting and very effective. So here you can see one of the children who would need more support with their language. But again, if you look carefully at the sentences, the editing would need to come in for some, obviously they need some support with spelling, and we go back and look at grammar, but don't want to get bogged down in grammar while we're generating ideas and generating excitement. That's something we can go back and edit again. We just want to make sure we get the ideas and really catch the excitement in the moment, because the writing and the editing are 2 separate jobs. So we want to make sure that the children start to understand that when I've written all my ideas down, I'm stopped. It's only half the job. You need to go back and check it and make edits. But if we look to with one of the other children in the class then, who is a little bit further on in their language development skills, we can see that although the sentences are very different in terms of their content, they're written about 2 separate things, the structures are broadly similar in the way that they're written. And again, that gives those children who might say, I don't like writing, I don't read a lot, I'm not good at writing, if they can see, well, I'm writing a similar thing to my peer, I can use some interesting words. We talk about generating that fun and that excitement and that success. That's going to want the children to breed, you know, to continue to be successful, and success breeds success. So this is an approach that's really interesting. But I'm going to show in the next slide how we develop then from a number of sentences into a broader paragraph. The next bit of planning that we did was based on A Christmas Carol. We read A Christmas Carol, the first few chapters, just before we went into lockdown before Christmas. Unfortunately, one of my children had said, well, I've read this and I know what happens next by that point. So we had to be imaginative and come up with another reason why Scrooge would hate Christmas. And we got as far as The Ghost of Christmas Past. And the idea that we came up with was that Scrooge was planning to marry his fiancée, and he missed the courage to take him to meet his fiancée, and his opportunity to get married to his fiancée had passed. So the way that we structured this is we identified that we were going to write about 5 different points. So we were going to set the scene, then we were going to say that Scrooge realizes he's going to be a little bit late. On his way to get the car, something had to happen, and one of the children said, it's Christmas time, there's going to be Christmas carolers going on. What if he bashes into the Christmas carolers? Great, lovely, lots we can write about there. Scrooge is rushing to the carriage, and the last thing that we're going to write about is, unfortunately, Scrooge doesn't make it to the carriage. So in the Jane Constantine literature, we call these plot points. And then once we'd identified the points that we were going to write about, this is where, as a teacher, then I took a little bit more control. And I said, well, children, I'd like you to write about these things, and where our knowledge of our previous Alan Pete sentences got dripped in. So you can see there are some Alan Pete type sentence structures there, but there are also things like write a sentence with a feeling, start a sentence talking about using one of your senses, use a simile, lots of different things there. So across the range of our 5 plot points. We're going to write 3 sentences roughly about each plot point, but you are covering all of these different things, which is going to get us away from the and then, and next, after that, which children still would have been writing coming up as they progress through our school had we not started to teach them about these different ways to start sentences and use these structures in their own writing. So that I've got 2 examples to show, and I'm almost done then. So there are the plot points we'd identified and including these different types of sentences. It's a little bit small, unfortunately, but what you can see if you look at it in detail is the idea of moving from individual sentences to a paragraph isn't a massive leap, whereas previously I might have maybe 18 months or 2 years ago talked to children about some things that might happen and then say, right, okay, boys and girls, you've got lots of ideas, go and write them as a paragraph. Here we've plotted out carefully what we want to write about exactly and given the children lots of the sentence structures already. So again, like we talked about reducing that germane load, breaking writing down into small chunks, it allows the children to be successful, and all of the children can write a new scene about why Scrooge would hate Christmas. So again, making it manageable, breaking it down into small chunks is something that's been massively beneficial. For me as a teacher, seeing the children excited about writing is one of the things that I get great joy from, and showing the children they can all be successful and just generating the buzz and the talk about what word, how is that word more effective than that word. This approach has allowed us to really build a love for writing into the fabric of the classroom. So the last couple of slides are just talking about what's next. Using the things that I've been reading recently about the writing revolution, we wanted to look at all of these sentence types. Predominantly these sentence types are based on fiction and writing narrative. So how can we use the similar strategies and take that into our non-fiction writing? And like we discussed on the last webinar, what can we do to help increase the children's knowledge through writing of the broader range of tasks that we have to go through? So some of the things that we looked about were recently because, but, and so sentences, which appear in the writing revolution. And this has been fascinating for me because when I planned these activities, I didn't anticipate what the value that you could see when the children complete the sentences. They've been massively valuable in terms of assessing children's understanding. So here's a maths, obviously, is a maths example there, but you can see just by using those structures, they really have to drill down into what the children know about that specific item. And again, then one of the other sentences that we've started to use recently was to use the appositives to extend writing. So in this example, there's the short extract at the top about the Amazon rainforest. I've written the first part of the paragraph, the first part of the sentence rather, and given the first statement, but the child has to write the second part of the statement that matches up. So again, that's extending their understanding, challenging their understanding of the content whilst encouraging them to write a specific structure and in a more formal way rather than moving away from just the narrative. I hope that's been useful, and there's some things I'm obviously at any point anybody like to get in touch and discuss anything. My email is there, and I hope that somebody can take something useful from the presentation. Thank you.
Oh, definitely. I'm sure they certainly will, Neil. There's lots of different approaches there that we can lift and plop in our own classrooms. And on behalf of Central South Consortium, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of the contributors to this webinar about effective practice for the explicit teaching of writing. Thank you.